Welcome back to the ID427 Garage, buddy. Well, let's go through a quick recap. So far on the Type 65 Coupe, we have installed the brake fluid reservoirs, and we've got this tied into the master cylinders. We have not rebled the brakes. And we've got the fuel tank in place. We got the fuel pump in. We resealed the top of the sending unit. And we've run our fuel lines. So I think what I'm going to do today is probably something I should have started with, but I kind of been putting off, which is the interior cockpit aluminum panels. Now, I've said this before, you know, to guys that are doing the Mark IV Roadsters. This is where you want to start. You want to start with all your panels, and this is the reason. A lot of these panels, at least in the way I install them, are going to get riveted back here. They're going to get riveted behind the cockpit, right where the tire sits. So you've spent all this time trying to get this thing on four wheels for tires that are going to sit in your garage for a year, and now you have to take the tires and wheels off in order to get to the pop rivets that you're going to be holding some of the panels on from the back. Now, if this is the first time you're watching our video because you're doing a coupe, this is why I install the pop rivets from the inside of the wheel well. I install them that way because in a lot of cases we're having these panels powder coated. We're going to have these powder coated black. That's going to be the finished surface of the inside of the wheel well. So the last thing you want to see when you peer in that wheel well is the ugly side of the rivet head coming through. You would much rather have the domed finished side of the rivet facing inward because it's going to get covered with heat and sound mat or lizard skin or one of those other spray-on thermal linings, and it's not going to make a difference because it gets covered. Now, you could take the easy way out, and by no means am I, throwing shade at any of you guys that install these panels exactly the way Factory 5 has them laid out in the build manual. You can install them from the inside of the cockpit out. And maybe you're going to use some, rhino lining or some type of truck bed lining, even undercoating, to cover up the heads of the rivets, and that's fine. Airplane overhead. 2 airplanes overhead. Anyways, so the reason that I install the panels this way is because I want every finished area of the car, even the inside of the wheel wells, to appear like they were done by the OE. And if you look in the fender wells of your daily driver, you're going to find that all the fasteners, even for the plastic wheel inserts, the wheel well inserts, they go in from the inside of the wheel well, basically out, so that they look finished from the inside. So that's what I'm trying to accomplish here. I'm trying to think ahead as I'm putting all these panels in, and one, make sure they align properly, and then two, make sure that I've installed the pop rivets in a manner that they're going to be the most presentable when the project is finished. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go upstairs. I'm going to try to collect all of the aluminum panels that are going to go inside the car here. So for instance, I have all the panels for that side, for the driver's side, but I do not have the floor panel for the passenger side. I do not have the back side piece. I do have the actual door side piece. But I want to get all the panels down here. And what I want to do is I want to install them with the self-tapping screws that Factory 5 had them installed with, and then start making my adjustments. I've just found that, for me anyway, having them in place, all of them in place, allows me to see where I can move and shift things on a broad scale to start with and get them as close as I can before I start fine-tuning all of them. Because you're going to find when the folks at Factory 5 put these panels in, they're just securing them so they'll stay in place for shipping. That's it. They're not perfect. They're not exactly where they need to be. They're just kind of put in place so that you, the end user, the end builder, can decide exactly where you want the panels to reside when everything is all said and done. The other thing is I always want to make sure that my panel overlap again, just like the popper, if it's going in from the right side, my panel overlap is going to be to the side that it is the most aesthetically pleasing, meaning if I'm going to cover up a panel gap or a panel overlap with heat and sound mat, I'd rather have it facing in than facing out. So on the outside of the car, especially in the wheel wells or the front of the cockpit foot boxes, that those panels look better than they would if I just simply overlapped them whichever way that they were shipped. So always keep that stuff in mind. And in the case of the coupe, it's much more important because when the bonnet goes up, it's all exposed. Not like the Mark IV, you know, it's more like the hot rod, right? If you're running a hot rod with no hood and no fenders, you're gonna see everything. So when that bonnet comes up in the front, the foot boxes are all exposed. So you're gonna wanna make sure that every popper of it is equally spaced, that every one of them is put in properly and fully seated, because if there's just one out of place, that's exactly where the eye is gonna go when someone is looking at a car show. All right, so pretty quickly you can see that putting the panels in, getting them all organized, will kind of set you on your path to which pieces are going to need to be pop riveted and placed first. What we want to do now that we've got them just setting there, because I've just got them set in there loose, you can see the panel over there is just kind of resting against the back. I'm going to install all the screws that were previously installed by Factory 5 just to get them to fit a little bit tighter. Then I'm going to work on the overlap of the panels. So you can see right here, I've got the overlap of these panels on the inside. That's where I want them to stay. I want this one to stay on the inside. Same thing on the other side. One that I'm going to have trouble with is right here, because this panel really needed to go on before the bottom panel here, like it is on the other side. And here's the thing. I mean, this panel didn't get powder coated. I've written on it PC because we're going to powder coat that. We're also going to powder coat these, and we're going to powder coat these. Anything that's kind of facing the wheel well, we're going to make sure it gets powder coated black. Haven't decided yet whether I'm going to powder coat the back panel, but I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens there. But I'm trying to powder coat everything that is going to be like seen down the tunnel. And you got to remember, the engine's going to sit in the way here, but there will be those angles that you will be able to see this bare aluminum panel, right? So we want to make sure that that one gets powder coated. The one on this side did get powder coated. So maybe there was just a little miscommunication between the owner and the guy he had working on the car previously. I don't know. I'm not going to get into it. It's not my problem. But we're going to make sure that we get all of the panels powder coated that are going to be seen. So again, that one's powder coated on this side. We're going to powder coat the other one on the other side. We're going to powder coat this one here only because of that corner. You can see this little corner here from the wheel well. And so I want to make sure that it gets powder coated. Now, is that overkill? Probably, but you know, I'm trying to build these cars to a higher standard than, you know, just any, like, I don't know, how do you say this without making people feel bad? Like any shade tree mechanic might. You know, I'm not trying to just build a car that's going to be, you know, acceptable. It's one thing to build a car well. It's another thing to build a car well that looks like it was built well. So that's what we're trying to achieve here. So I want to make sure that all the panels that could ever be seen from any other angle are going to get powder coated, so that we're not going to have an issue later on where, you know, poor guy's sitting in a parking lot somewhere at a car show, and some guy walks up and go, "How can you even powder coat that panel right there? You know, you can see it." So that's what we're trying to avoid. Perfect example, and I just saw this. The panel that makes up the upper dash or lower dash portion right there at that angle right behind our fuel lines isn't powder coated. I think we're going to probably end up powder coating that panel, even though it's going to be really busy coming out of the bottom of that panel. We're going to have a lot of electrical lines coming to the front of the car and to the back of the car through there. You know, our gauge wiring is going to come through there. But, you know, just like on the Mark IV, where we're coming through the firewall with all that stuff right here, we powder coat the firewall. So I'm going to treat that just as another piece of the firewall. We're going to get it powder coated, and it's going to look the part when we're all done. So let me get going on placing these panels, getting all of the tech screws in where they need to go. And then once I start getting some of the stuff marked and ready to drill, I'll bring you guys back. I'll show you what I've done. And then hopefully in this video, I'm hoping to get a good majority of the panels in place, clecoed, so that we can get all the panels that need to be powder coated off to the powder coater and back here so that we can start installing some of these, because I'm hoping to have the engine here in the next few weeks. All right, much later in the day, I went through and I've got all of the pieces of the cockpit fastened in place temporarily with some sheet metal screws. So the self-tapping number 8 hex head sheet metal screws that Factory 5 uses, I've got a whole collection of those, because all the ones we pull out, obviously we save, except for the ones that aren't stripped. And I've got a whole container full of them, but that's neither here nor there. That's what I'm using to fasten this all in place temporarily. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go under the car and we're gonna basically mark where all the structural members are on the back sides of these panels. Now you can see the owner and the guy that was previously building the car for him marked the panels, but they didn't mark the panels with the panels being in a position that I'm particularly fond of. So we're going to go ahead and we are going to mark them where they sit right now. And that should allow us to go ahead, pull the panels off, drill the holes where all the structural members are, reinstall the panels in the positions we've previously had them, because we'll be able to locate them with the self-tapping screws, and then drill all the chassis members to coincide with the panels. At which point, once it's all fit, then we'll be able to take all the panels off and take all of the panels that we're going to have powder coated off to the powder coater. Now, there are some pieces that I'm going to go ahead and have powder coated as well. There's a piece here, and there's a piece over on the other side that's a mirror image of that I'm going to have powder coated. I'm going to have the rear splash shields powder coated, and I'm going to have the front splash shields powder coated as well, since they're all going to need to be coated the same color anyways. I may do it in 2 batches. I've got enough panels. Usually about the minimum I want to take to the powder coater is about 10 panels. But I mean, I could take them all. The more I give him all at one time, obviously the better price he can give me, because he's doing more panels. But sometimes it's just, I'm going to end up having to have, I'm going to have probably a couple of straggling pieces at the end. And so if I've got a couple of big pieces to do at the end and I find a couple of small pieces that I've got to do because I forgot them, or they, whatever, then I can kind of cut the price down by having more panels to take to him at once. So I may split it into 2. I may just concentrate on getting all the stuff I need for the cockpit and the tunnel this time, and then take all the splash shields and whatever miscellaneous stuff I might have to add later down to the powder coater for the second time. But we'll see how it goes. So that's about as far as I'm going to get today. I'm pretty happy with the way everything kind of lined up, but there'll probably be a little bit of shifting here or there, and we'll get all of these fitting really nice before we put them in for the final time. All right, I wasn't going to pick up the camera today only because my allergies are killing me. So if you hear me sniffling, just know that that's the reason. But I'm working on panels. So I'm just starting to get all the panels in place. As I am fitting them in the areas that I can, I am pre-drilling them. So like for instance, across the top here, I can mark that, I can pre-drill it. I can get it in with a couple of clecos. But then on the back sides where I can't see where the frame members are, I'm marking everything, and then I'll pull all the panels off. I'll drill them from the back side so that all of the places where I'm going to fasten them to from this side are visible, and then I'll drill the chassis to correspond with the holes that I made in the panels. Hope that made sense. Anyway, so I'm over here pulling the wheels off because I need access to all of this stuff, and I'll get into that in just a second when I go over to the other side where I've got the wheel off already. But what you can see in here is that there were some wheel spacers that were put on here, but the existing studs were not cut shorter. And so just in the roller wheels and tires that I have on here now, there's a gap in between the actual spacer and the back of the wheel. So what's happening is the existing wheel studs are hitting the back of the wheel. There's no recess for them. Now, some wheels may have a recess in that area and you don't have to do this, but you know, once you get your wheel spacers on, they're pretty much going to be on all the time unless you have to pull off the rotors to have the rotors machined or something like that. So it just makes sense to go ahead and pull the wheels back off, trim the studs so that the wheels sit flush regardless of what wheels that you end up putting on your car. So I'll show you on the other side, since I've already got those done, that we've trimmed the existing studs so that they are back behind the edge of the wheel. So if I hold it, camera up here, you can see that the existing studs no longer stick out past. And when I pull that wheel off over there, I'll show you how much they stick out past. Now, when you're doing this, make sure that you have a lug in place. So pull the wheel spacer off. I've got some old wheel lugs of the same size. I put those on and then marked, before I pulled the wheel spacer off, I marked a line with a black Sharpie just to know where I wanted to cut these off so that it'd be flush. Then I ran on one of the old lug nuts that I have laying around, and then I cut these off with the death wheel. So I got the death wheel and the grinder right there. What that lug nut allows you to do is after you cut it, it will clean the threads of the stud as you pull the lug nut off. And then you can just go around there and dress it with a file, which I've done, so that the wheels lug nuts, when you go to put them back on for the final time, thread on and you don't get them cross thread or anything else. So this side is done. So now this will all sit nice and flush when we put the wheel on. The reason I'm doing this is that I'm going to get in here on the back side of these panels and I'm going to run my rivets in from this side into the cockpit, because talk to me about your OCD. That's cute. But I don't think you can appreciate the OCD until you get to this point of your car build and you decide which way you're going to run the rivets in so that they look the prettiest. All of these pop rivets will go in from the wheel side, the wheel well side of these panels, so that they look pretty when you look in here. Now, there are some spots I just cannot get to. Like, since all the suspension is in here now, and I wouldn't have done this way, I would have put the panels in first, fit them all, got them powder coated and all that stuff before I put the suspension in the car, and the diff for that matter, because I could have got in to these spots in here and I could have run all those pop rivets in from the outside of the car in towards the cockpit. But this stuff is already in there. I'm not taking all this apart just to get some rivets in there, and I can't get my rivet gun in there, let alone my hands, to get the pop rivets set from the outside in. So at some point, my OCD loses because I simply can't get in there. So in those spots will go from the inside of the cockpit out. They won't be seen unless somebody crawls under the car. But, you know, I know that I've done my best to make the car look the best it's going to look by taking a little bit of time and putting the rivets in the direction that is going to make them the best looking. So that's why I'm pulling the wheels off. While I had the wheels off, I noticed this when we originally changed the owner's supplied wheels to our shop wheels, and we do that so we don't booger up their wheels during the build process. And yes, I do have more than one set of shop wheels. So let me take this side off and I'll show you just exactly how far those wheel studs stick out, and you'll see that you wouldn't want to run the car like that, you know, once you get the thing on the road. It's just ridiculous. All right, so there you go, wheels off. You can see that those wheel studs stick out, what, 5/8 to 3/4 of an inch. And on the back of these wheels, there's no, well, there is a little bit of a recess. There's about, I don't know, 1/4 of an inch recess for those studs to fit in there. But that doesn't allow the wheel to bottom out against the inside of the wheel spacer, the hub of the wheel to bottom out. So it just makes sense. So we're going to take the Sharpie, we're going to mark all these around the outside. We'll pull the wheel spacer off, we'll cut all 5 studs, and then we'll reinstall the wheel spacer, and that'll be done. I'll bring you back as I'm working on more of these panels, and we'll take a look at that process. All right, you should be able to see the Sharpie that I marked on each one of these wheel studs. And basically, we'll just put this on real quick. You can see that that line is just a little bit farther back than the face of the wheel spacer. So we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna cut all those. And then we'll put the spacer back on and run all the nuts back down, torque them to spec, and then we'll be good to go back here. Here you can see where I've got some clecos in place for all of the holes that I've drilled back here. What I found was that as I was trying to start from the bottom and go up, as I was drilling, it was actually just pushing the panel away. It was pushing the inner panel, which is the back panel of the cockpit right here. It was just pushing it away, and so I just started inserting a cleco all the way up, and that kept everything kind of sandwiched together as I drilled, and I got the holes drilled all the way up this side. Now there's going to be a series of holes coming from the inside that are going to go into this chassis member right here, just like there will be for this chassis member and this chassis member. So when I reinstall all this for the final time, I'm actually going to put these clecos in first to hold everything together, and then the other clecos or pop rivets will end up coming from the other side and pulling everything against the chassis from the inside. Now if you notice, everywhere where I've got these stop marks and the arrows pointing this direction, that is where I know the panel is not going to be able to come flush against the chassis. And so I don't want to be drilling holes up in here where I know I'm not going to get a rivet in there to pull that tight. So that's why those arrows are there. I'll drill the holes from the other side, basically in the panel and then into the chassis, only in the spots where I know it'll suck tight to the chassis. Down here, it's all the way against the chassis from top to bottom, so I know that's not going to be a problem, so no arrows there. And then you'll see in some other areas where I've got arrows like this, those are for my cut lines. So I don't like the way that panel overlaps. It's going to cause a bump when we put our heat and sound mat in. So I'm going to trim that panel back to minimize that bump as it transitions from one panel to the other. Now, this was put together the other way around from factory 5. So those tabs would have faced the tunnel side of the car. Well, in my opinion, that's stuff that you'll see from the other side, whether or not the engine and transmission are in place or not. It's just one of those things where, you know, I say, oh, it's cute, you've got OCD. I don't think a lot of people can appreciate the level of OCD that I have sometimes for this stuff, because panel overlaps like that just drive me nuts. And it's one of the things that I did in my build when I built Slytherin, and you know, I didn't know any better back then. So I put the panels back in exactly the way that they came from factory 5. And looking back, you know, I've got the rivet heads, the ugly side of the rivets coming through panels on Slytherin, and when I pull a wheel off or something like that, it just bugs the crap out of me, knowing that had I known, I would have run the rivets in from the other side and they would have looked that much better. The way I minimized it on Slytherin is I just I used some black undercoating in the fender wells, and then, you know, the heads or the ugly side of the rivets kind of disappear that way. But just know that going in, you don't have to go with the overlap that, you know, factory 5 kind of pre-assembles these cockpit panels when they ship the car. You can overlap them any way you want in order to make them look nicer. And sometimes, like in the case of the coupe here, you know, I don't build coupes all the time, and so there just aren't as many of them out there as there are Mark IV Roadsters or Mark I through 4 Roadsters. So the frequency at which I build the coupe is far less than the frequency that I build a Mark IV. So, you know, I'm spending a little more time with this one because I don't want to have to go back to something later that, you know, I could have fixed knowing that I build these all the time. I don't. So in this case, I'm really spending a lot of extra time getting these panels in place in a manner that I think is going to look the best long term. Steve Miller Band, the Joker. This is as far as I'm going to get in this video. I took all of the interior cockpit panels over to the powder coater yesterday, and he'll probably have them for 4 to 5 days. So I'm done as far as I can right now, only because of this piece right here. If I had this one piece, I could go ahead and I could put the floor in, I could put the 2 rear tunnel pieces in, I could put the back in. The 2 pieces in the cockpit here that I have are going to be going here and on the other side, but this panel right here was not previously powder coated like its counterpart over on the other side, and so I'm stuck. I could go ahead and I could probably put the floor piece in here, which I just finished drilling, but it just doesn't make sense. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to wait for those powder coated pieces to come back from the powder coater, and then I'm going to just bust out all of these interior panels. And then once those are in and done, I did have this upper piece powder coated as well. I'll be able to drill holes in this piece, get my wiring harness for the rear of the car through that piece and to the back of the car, and then we're essentially ready for the engine and the transmission to drop in. So we'll see what the owner has going with the engine. I'm waiting on his buddy that's assembling the engine because he has the engine and the transmission, and he has some other assorted parts for the clutch that I'm still waiting on as well. So I'm kind of stuck right now. I mean, there's other things that I could do. I could start working on the aluminum panels for the back part of the car, but I'd much rather get all of this stuff ready so that if the engine does become available here in the next couple weeks, I can drop it in, and then we can start really hammering out a good chunk of some of the other stuff that needs to be done on the car. So I think that's going to do it for this one. If you guys are enjoying the content, as always, please do the like, the share, the subscribe, all that kind of stuff. We'll see you next time. Have a great day.